I'm so glad you've joined us for this special time with Dr. Carmen Acevedo Butcher. I was just thinking that it is probably almost exactly 5 years ago this week that Alignment began its journey online in this format and grew from a neighborhood project where some of you were right there at the beginning, where we brought people together of different faith traditions and has grown into this global community where we're so blessed that we can have those of you joining us from Australia and states around the country as well, where we build connections and we build them from and through this great diversity that makes us all unique beings. We are in this space every week on Sundays or Monday mornings, depending on where you are, where we share a time of prayer and reflection from a different tradition each week. And it is also almost exactly 2 years ago that we began these monthly visits from authors. And we have hosted Valerie Kaur and Brian McLaren and Randy Woodley, John Philip Newell, Caitlin Curtis, Imam Jamal Rahman. I wish I could say them all to you. But I wanted to mention that it was our very first author to share their work. I bet some of you remember, was Reverend Dr. Barbara Holmes, who was a colleague of Dr. Carmen's at the Center for Action and Contemplation. So tonight I say we honor her and we remember her in this space, someone who taught us that contemplation happens in community. So friends, just a reminder that although this is recorded, that recording will not capture your screens or your chats. This space is for you. We hope you engage in it. We'd love for you to share in the chat where you're coming from and on whose land you reside. And I'd also like to say a welcome to all of those of you in the future who are going to be watching this recording and coming together on Saturday to have more conversation about this. But it is with deep gratitude and excited anticipation and a little nerdiness, as we talked about before as well, to welcome Dr. Carmen Acevedo Butcher to share her beautiful work with us tonight. So welcome everyone, and welcome Dr. Carmen.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I really appreciate it. And I am delighted to be here. I've watched so many of these author visits. I want to start immediately with a song. It's the opening prayer to the Cloud of Unknowing. It's this way or this way, same book. And it's in the Middle English. And it's something that I use for meditation a lot. It's also my name, Carmen, means song or poem. So it really speaks to me deeply. God, untohum alla hertes ben hopan, and untohum alla willa speketh, and untohum no private thing is hid. He besageth they so for to cleanse the intent of mine heart with the unspeakable gift of the grassa, that he may perfectly love they, and worthily praise they. Amen. And this song that opens up the Cloud of Unknowing from the 14th century is written by a Carthusian, maybe monk or a priest. We're not quite sure. But whoever he was a teacher's teacher, and he was a translator's translator, really, because he takes one word in a song that was originally a Latin hymn from the 10th century. He changes Holy Spirit, because this is really a collect of the Holy Spirit, and he changes it into the word grace, which is in Middle English is grassa. Sounds like grass, right? But it really is grace. And I love that because when I sing this outside, when I go for walks through the marsh, I often think that grace is also the green grass. It's all grace. And in Middle English, it even sounds like grass, rasa. And you can read this, what the words actually say, but what it mainly is saying is that God, all of our hearts are open to you. Nothing is hidden from you. And we ask that you will help us really to love, to be open to you and to love is mainly the gist of it. So that's who I am. I am somebody who sings a lot. It's one way that I have dealt with childhood trauma. And I'm not talking, people, when they hear you say that you sing, I guess they think perhaps you mean only joyful songs, but I mean also, um, the blues. I have always turned everything into a kind of a song. And so, in addition to doing that, I grew up in the South. So I had some difficulties early in life, not only with trauma, but also growing up as a woman in the South and a brown woman at that. My my mother is white. My father was Cuban, brown Cuban, and we didn't have a lot of money growing up. I was told I couldn't go to college. I also had dyslexia, still do, but it was undiagnosed. So mainly what I thought was that I was dumb and, couldn't read. It was really difficult. But I had kind teachers. Oh, how important it is to have kind teachers. And they didn't know, because I was very good at hiding any difficulties that I had. But through their kindness, I gained a lot of joy in learning. And I always loved to read. It was just very difficult. Over time, I came to realize that my mother and I, we were talking, Margaret and I, before we started, about how she and her father shared this love of words. And Margaret was showing me, can I say this, Margaret, what you showed me beforehand? Margaret was showing me this new tattoo she has, which is scansion. She was like, do you know what this is? I was like, yes, scansion. This is awesome. And so I was thinking how one of the reasons that I love words is because my mother, who is one of the kindest people I've ever known in my entire life, loved words too. So we would read poetry together. And so my mother never could go to college because her family was they couldn't afford it. But she always encouraged me. And through scholarships, I was able to go to college eventually. And through past in my 20s and 30s and 40s, I had severe depression. Not anymore, gratefully. But I was always singing. I was doing Lectio Divina, but I didn't call it that because I was raised, or as I think of it, without any irony, lowered in the Southern Baptist Church. And for a woman, you could keep the nursery, you could cook for the tables, for the dinner on the grounds, but you couldn't be in the pulpit. And I remember when I turned 42 or so and I was teaching in a college, one of my friends who's Methodist said, hey, we'd like you to come and preach at our church. And when I climbed up into that pulpit, I was like, surely lightning is going to strike me. Because that was just, I really had this really weird sensation, all not even kidding, because we were never allowed to go up there. It was just not, just wasn't, it wasn't possible. And so when I graduated from college, I wanted to live with my sister who was studying nursing in Athens. So I thought, well, I'll apply to be a secretary there for the German department. And I will just work and live with my sister. Well, they had already filled the position. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? And there was an opening to do some research, like a research assistant at the University of Georgia. So I applied to graduate school. So my whole life has been sort of like, y'all know crawdads. I grew up in Alabama catching and releasing crawdads because they were so fascinating how they go backwards if you touch them. My whole life has been a kind of going forwards by going backwards. I didn't have this grand plan or grand scheme. I didn't have the money to determine my path, but I just kind of followed the tugs of my heart, really. So I wanted to live with my sister. She's a really kind person. I ended up going to graduate school. There, I studied with the kindest professors and also listened to what I really enjoyed. And I ended up doing things like working with John Aljo, who was the Theosophical Society president and meditated. I learned a lot about that through him. And also, I didn't know it, but he had been a translator. So I just was always led to kind people, kind, smart people. And while I was in graduate school, I had the great joy of translating a Benedictine monk from the 10th century, Alfrich. Doesn't everybody have a friend named Alfrich? A-E, it's Ash, Lfric. And it was great joy. What I learned from that was that I was really good at doing these repetitive experiences with language, that each time you do them, you're doing something different with them. So it's not exactly like, it's like my friend James Finley, Jim says, that repetition is not always redundant. Translation is the best example of that. And one of the ways that I came into Lectio Divina, I wanted to share further, is that in Southern Baptist churches, and because my mother has always been a mystic without that label, my mother would always say to me, I really think memorizing Bible verses is important. And because my mother was kind, I was like, well, okay, I'll memorize some Bible verses. I was like your oldest child. I was the good oldest child, so to speak, good. And I started memorizing. The very first one I did was in Vacation Bible School, was Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We've come a long way since then, but I discovered by memorizing verses, as I later look back on it, when I got the term Lectio Divina from my Catholic friends, dead and alive, like Julianne of Norwich and the Cloud of Unknowing Anonymous, I discovered that you cannot memorize a scripture or a poem or anything without doing Lectio Divina with it. If you're really memorizing it in a way that gets into yourself on a cellular level. So I started when I was in graduate school. I went through a period of severe depression, and I started typing up. This was, we were just about to get word processors and such, but anyway, I would type up on 3x5 cards or on paper and tape it onto cards verses and walk around Athens with these. Not really for people to see me, because I didn't want to become like, because I studied Christopher Smart and I really appreciate what he did, but I didn't want anybody to really notice I had these verses on 3x5 cards, and I would walk around with them, and they helped to heal my soul over time. It took a lot of time. Then I met my husband, Sean, when I went on a Fulbright to England, to the University of London. And his love further helped to heal me. And I have spent a lot of time alone doing meditation on long walks ever since I was a teenager. I was out in nature a lot, walking alone, often very lonely, but never alone, because I started realizing that nature was speaking to me. So when I read that Jesus said that even if these people didn't shout out, if they didn't celebrate that I'm here, the stones themselves would cry out. And I know you had, who was it? Was it Patty Crock? Who was it that you had here? Is that right?
Yeah, Patty Crock.
Yeah, Patty Crock. And
Yeah.
she was talking about the stones in her talk. And I was like, I totally understood that, because I had suffered such abuse growing up. I would walk out in nature and nature spoke with me. I understood that completely. It could even be a stray dog. It didn't have to be, dogs would come up to me and we would have conversations, so to speak. So I'm really grateful, because then I got into the way I got into translation was right. I needed to have a PhD. I need to do a dissertation. And I just wasn't interested in doing something with Moby Dick another analysis of Moby Dick, I really wanted to do something that would feed my soul. And this is when I was telling you about the crawdad. It's really true. I would go backwards because I was trying to figure out, what will I do a dissertation on? It has to be all this fancy stuff. And I'm from the country. Nobody has a PhD where I'm from. In fact, they're thinking, what's wrong with Carmen? She's still in school. Won't they let her out? Hadn't she graduated yet? I mean, seriously, she's not married. She's still in school. Um, and literally, I went into a professor's office one day to ask something else. And he goes, have you come up with a dissertation topic yet? I'm like, no. He was like, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about this? I'm just standing in the hall and he's just, yeah, have you thought about that? And then he goes, oh, and there's this guy named Alfred of Innisham, and I bet some of his sermons haven't been translated. I'm like, whoa. And I felt this tug. And I've learned over the years to trust the tug. And he reached up on a shelf and pulled down a book with some of Alfred's sermons. And that was what stuck. And the same has been true with the Cloud of Unknowing. I had become a mother. I was teaching at a college. And one day I thought to myself, what was that book I read in graduate school that had something to do with a cloud and prayer? And I was just pulled to it. And I wrote a few, publishers. And one of them said, we've already done it. Another one said, we were just looking for somebody to do that. So I've been very, very fortunate. I want to say that for me, translation is where you do a lot of things academically. And I know you know about this, Margaret, from teaching translation. But one of the things that you do is you've got to try to be empathetic. It's like when I was in therapy in Rome, my therapist would say, one of the things you do as a therapist is you move out of the way to give the person speaking with you room to talk and be. As a translator, you do something similar. You try to move out of the way so that whoever has written the book, that their voice can be heard and that their message can be heard. And then, as Martin Laird puts it so well in a blurb to Brother Lawrence, the translation I did of Practice of the Presence, you really have to try to bridge that gap between the language of, let's say, for the Cloud of Unknowing, the 14th century in England, which is very Germanic, right? But also with a bit of French, because, you already had 1066 and all that. But you have to bridge the gap between that, or like, say, with Brother Lawrence, the 17th century early modern French, and today. And as y'all know, you're not just bridging the gap of language, you're bridging the gap of culture, you're bridging the gap of technology. I mean, all the ways that we're different between now and then. And trying also, I'm always having conversations with dead authors, talking about author visit. I'm always having author visits with dead authors as a translator. I'm always like saying to Anonymous, so what do you think about this? Or to Nick, as I think of Nicholas Hermont, Nick, but Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection, what are you trying to say here? And I also, as a translator, often say to God, what should I do with this one naughty passage? And then you do all these academic things, because also in my mind, when I translate, is I'm thinking of John Aljo. And I'm thinking, what would he think of this translation I've just done? Would it pass his Phi Beta Kappa muster? Because he wanted you to do good work, like factual good work. And then I think of one of my inspirations, who is Jhumpa Lahiri. And I want to read a few quotes from Jhumpa Lahiri. She is one of my heroes, really. She calls translation how an author interrogates history. Isn't that a good way to put it? How an author interrogates history and hopes our world will grow tolerable and just. And she calls translation the most intense form of reading, which, like Lectio, is also an intense form of reading. And she adds with well-articulated irony, because if you know Jhumpa Lahiri, she's written in all genres. She, short stories, Pulitzer Prize winning for, She's also a translator, but here's what she says. Now that I have become a translator, in addition to remaining a writer, I am struck by how many people regard what I am doing as secondary and thus creatively inferior in nature. Translators are often described as being invisible, discreet, self sacrificing presences. Their names are frequently absent on book covers, but Jennifer Croft is making sure that's not true anymore. Their roles are meant to be supportive. Indeed, feminist scholars have argued that the practice of translation corresponds to traditional feminine archetypes in which a woman's position and identity were subservient to a man's. So you can see that for me, coming out of the evangelical tradition that was very conservative, being a translator was acceptable. I mean, I had a preacher tell me once that I could teach like K to 12. But once I got married, I would also, need to think about pulling back a little bit on even teaching outside the home because my place was inside the home. But being a translator, I felt I was being humble and all of that. But what I didn't know was that, you know, the mystery, God, love, however one terms mystery, had other ideas in mind too for my translation because I didn't really understand even as I began to translate. I didn't quite understand that it was healing me. And that was one of the reasons I was doing it, in addition to the joy of the puzzle of it's like Sudoku, but with words, on a really high level. And you read a lot of history books when you translate. Because if you, and the other thing I will say that I really love about translation is that I spend a lot of time with dictionaries, not just dictionaries like Merriam-Webster, but also the Oxford English Dictionary, because it gives historical uses of English, and also dictionaries of, like, say, French from early modern French. You start finding out how many dictionaries there are of French in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. And then once you find how a word is used in a dictionary from, let's say, the 1600s, and you can see if you can find a work that it's in, then you go to read about that word in that work and you start. I'm just going to say translation is a way to study everything. It's really a joy. So for me, I have always had tugs. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to mix together talking a little bit about both the Cloud of Unknowing and also Brother Lawrence, and tell you a little bit about how I got into translating Brother Lawrence. My friend, who is an editor, and I have done books over 2 decades together. And for some time, she kept saying to me before the pandemic started in 2020, she was like, I'd love to do another book with you. And I'm like, oh, that's so great. Thank you. But we were moving. My father died. A lot of things were happening, and I just didn't have the bandwidth. But then finally, in March of 2020, we met, and we met for 2 hours. And she had my friend, she has so many ideas. She's wonderful. She's a genius, really. And at the end of the we maybe covered, I don't know, 20 people that would be great to translate. And at the very end of the conversation, she was like, okay. And I'd taken copious notes. At the end, she goes, oh, right. Good to see you, Anna. But, there's Brother Lawrence. I mean, nobody's done him in a while, really, not majorly. So that might be something. And I felt the tug. So I didn't even tell her. This was March of 2020. I didn't even tell her. And because I thought I've only read Brother Lawrence in translation. And while I've loved the snippets, the excerpts of him that I've read in translation, I hadn't read all of him. I'm not sure if once I started reading him in the original and read all of him, if he would be worthwhile to translate. I never assume, because I would only want to translate what I find helpful, not harmful, do no harm. And so I started, first of all, I started typing him in the early modern French without the accents and other marks, because I just wanted to feel his words. So I started typing his spiritual maxims and his letters because I wanted to meet him. And as I started typing, I was like, I like this man. He's calm. And at the time, also, you could just hear the birds uh, tweeting more than ever before. We were at home, we were on lockdown. Uh, People were dying. My students, parents, and uncles and aunts who were essential workers were dying. And there was calm Brother Lawrence. Calm Brother Lawrence, who was born in the lowest caste of his society, the third estate, 98% of people. He was not a nobleman. He was not a clergyman then. And even when he joined that estate of clergy, he was the lowest of the clergy. So he had no privilege. He had no money. He had no education. And he went to war as a way, I think, to have some stability. He fought in the 30 Years' War, which by many historians' accounts, one of the most gruesome, not that any war is not, but was almost like the start of modern warfare in its horrible weapons. And he was injured. He was young, either late teens or early 20s. He was a prisoner of war. They threatened to shoot him. And his injury was such that he limped the rest of his life and was in severe pain. Brother Lawrence handled this by the practice of the presence, which he just developed out of his own need. And also, as a discalced, he became a discalced Carmelite friar. He became he was someone in the lineage, of course, of Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. And of course, they have the prayer of quiet. So he's in that lineage, but he kind of makes it his own also. So these two people have helped to heal me. And while I would like to say that I translated both of these for books, I actually really first translated them for myself. And I think you can kind of feel that in the works themselves, that yes, I translated them to try to, for them to be as accurate as possible, as close as possible to Anonymous and to Nick, to Brother Lawrence. But at the same time, I translated them for my soul's needs. And they are very nourishing works. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about, we can talk a little bit about my translation process a little bit more if you want, but I want to look at what actually is in their, like, what is the way of prayer that has made these two works be so enduring, really, and just read a little bit from them. And this makes me think also, why is translating important today? And I just want to offer two things before I jump into the sort of the theology, I guess, we could call it that. Why is translating important today? First of all, I think because, language ages. Whenever I'm translating, I'm always thinking, try not to use dateable language. So in other words, the kind of language that, becomes dated really quickly. Try to use perennial, because, Aldous Huxley said that Brother Lawrence has perennial wisdom. People love him. Even as Aldous Huxley says, even people who have no wisdom or faith tradition love Brother Lawrence. And the same is true for the Cloud of Unknowing, beloved by so many people of all different faiths and wisdom traditions, because I'm contacted by so many people who want me to come talk about the Cloud of Unknowing from all traditions. There's such, that perennial wisdom of the mystics is so evergreen with so many people. But so first of all, you want to have a fresh translation that also partakes of language that doesn't date as much as possible. In other words, a translation that will last longer. And then the other thing is, Timothy Snyder is one of my favorite scholars, and he has on tyranny, which is sadly and also soberly very important today for us to know about. One of the tenets that he says there, in addition to don't obey in advance, is be kind to our language. Be kind to our language. And I think, and that's one of the things that Jhumpa Lahiri talks about in her nonfiction book on translation, that being kind to our language is one way to combat fascism, to be really attentive to language. And I want to read a little bit from Elena Sixou. She was a Jewish French Algerian born, a Jewish French Algerian born experimental writer and philosopher. Elena Sixou. She's amazing. She speaks directly to the German language and grieves how it was misused by the Nazis to create words such as Entjudung or dejudification. The forced expulsion, this is a quote from her, the forced expulsion of Jews from business life in Nazi Germany is dejudification. So this is tragic and things that we see today in similar ways. Sixou wants to retrieve and reinvent history, rescue language, and how it became a plague that spread throughout the city. She writes, and this is a quote, "Oh, sweet German language, supple friend of the poets, you were treated like a concentration camp, Judeo guinea pig. On your tender cat's body were grafted crocodile fragments. Fangs were implanted in your words." And so one of the ways that I think translation is important is that it helps us be more mindful of language and to understand how important it is to be mindful of the language that we use now. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I talk about, and if I don't, please somebody ask me about the pronouns in Brother Lawrence in the practice of the presence. So the Cloud of Unknowing, when I first translated it, my mother said she was going to read it. And about a year ago, she said to me, I really am going to read it now. Now, I translated The Cloud of Unknowing first over 10 years ago. And she said, oh, sweetie, she said, I'm really meaning to get to it, but it's kind of hard. And I was like, no, mother. I said, you already do The Cloud of Unknowing. You already do contemplation. You just let your mind go and don't be intimidated by it. And I told her, I share this story because I find when I'm asked to talk places, sometimes people treat The Cloud of Unknowing a little bit with kid gloves, like it's this intellectual thing, and it's not at all. The Cloud of Unknowing is about contemplation. And he even says at one point in it, you really are basing contemplation is what happens after you've already done your Lectio Divina, right? He's assuming anyone who reads his book is engaging in Lectio Divina, which is steeping in scripture, right? Or sacred reading, like reading Augustine or others. And so I told my mother, I said, you already do this. If you treat it like you already do this, you're going to be surprised. So, and I said, also, you don't have to read it, mother. We already love each other. You don't have to read it. But she started reading it about a year ago, and she said, oh, I really like it this time. I see what you mean. So I want to talk about the cloud. Yes, it is the via negativa, or it's apophatic, right? It's the not saying. But it's very practical. And I want to read a few things. The first thing I love about the cloud is that he encourages his student, who's 24, and I think was a woman, and may have been Julianne of Norwich. We don't know. There's no way we can know for sure unless new evidence comes to light. But he encourages her to experiment. He doesn't set himself up as a guru. He says, and I quote, when you try these meditation strategies, I believe you'll have more to teach me than I ever could teach you. I say that because although everything I've said about these is true, I myself am far from having mastered them. So I ask you, help me by being diligent in these contemplative stratagems, because the more you learn, the more you can teach me. And then he says, he gives her two ways of strategies. First of all, he says, I obviously am assuming that you're steeping in scripture. But then he says one way to handle thoughts is when thoughts come to you, and he personifies thoughts, he says, just look around them over their shoulders as if you're looking for something else. And you're looking for God, but just ignore them. In other words, look around them, look over their shoulder. And the other strategy he gives her is he says, when the thoughts are overwhelming, just sort of collapse, admit defeat, and just give up, so to speak. Like, just, I can't do that, just let it go, let it all go. Stop trying, in sort of a way, as very wise. But then he also says, and if these don't work for you, come up with ones of your own. I mean, he's very practical. In essence, his main thing is steep in scripture. And that's something I have always done. I'm very thankful to my mother for that. I've steeped in scripture. I've steeped in wise writings of others from all traditions, and in poetry, lots of poets. But I have really spent time with I don't call it the monkey mind. I call it the squirrel mind, because I'm from Georgia. I've spent a lot of time with steeping in wise, calm words until they're memorized, and they have helped to calm my mind. William Menninger and I, who did was part of the centering prayer movement with Thomas Keating and Basil Pennington, he said that if you only read one chapter 3 of the Cloud of Unknowing would be a good one. And so I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to quickly turn over to Brother Lawrence for just a minute, because they're very similar ways of praying, even though we pretend they're not, but they're very similar ways of praying in both of them. I'm going to read to you the whole chapter 3. It's not long. Lift up your heart to God with a gentle stirring of love. Focus on him alone. Want him and not anything he's made. Think on nothing but him. Don't let anything else run through your mind and will. Here's how. Forget what you know. Forget everything God made and everybody who exists and everything that's going on in the world until your thoughts and emotions aren't focused on or reaching toward anything, not in a general way and not in any particular way. Let them be. For the moment, don't care about anything. This is the work of the soul that most pleases God. All saints and angels rejoice in it and are willing to help you. Everyone on earth has been helped by contemplation in wonderful ways. You can't know how much. This spiritual exercise even lessens the pain for all souls that have passed on. And no other discipline can purify your soul as deeply. But it's the easiest work of all when a soul is helped by grace to feel a pure desire. Contemplation follows. Otherwise, it's hard, nearly impossible to do. So a lot like Richard Rohr, the Cloud of Unknowing's Anonymous says, it's super easy to learn to contemplate. You just have to do it. And also sometimes it may seem hard, right? Especially at the first when you're taking on a new habit. Then Anonymous says, so stop hesitating. Do this work until you feel the delight of it. In the trying is the desire. And this is one of the things I love about the cloud. In essence, he says, just wanting to do it, the longing and wanting to do it is doing it, in essence. In other words, it helped me develop self-compassion over time. The first time you practice contemplation, you'll only experience a darkness like a cloud of unknowing. You won't know what this is. You'll only know that in your will, you feel a simple reaching out to God, that longing. You must also know that this darkness and this cloud will always be between you and your God, whatever you do. They'll always keep you from seeing him clearly by the light of understanding in your intellect and will block you from feeling him fully in the sweetness of love in your emotions. So be sure you make your home in this darkness. Stay there as long as you can, crying out to him over and over again because you love him. It's the closest you can get to God here on earth by waiting in this darkness and in this cloud. Work at this diligently as I've asked you to, and I know God's mercy will lead you there. And he says in other places, this will heal you. And when he describes this as a darkness, he doesn't mean depression. He's talking about the darkness as like the dark night of the soul, that going without the intellect into the mystery. Brother Lawrence, on the other, and he says, use a word of one syllable, maybe two, God or love, he recommends, and to use that as a way to help let go of thoughts and to rest in contemplation. I, for one, had to learn to rest. I don't know about y'all, but it's something I still have to work at. But the cloud really helped me. Brother Lawrence, on the other hand, 250 years on, here's the way Brother Lawrence puts it. He writes in a letter to a lay woman, in the middle of your tasks, you can comfort yourself with love as often as you can, and during meals and conversations, lift up your heart to God sometimes. The slightest little awareness will always be very pleasant. I think if he were writing today, he could add, and if you're speaking at alignment, let your thoughts go up in prayer while you're speaking with the alignment community. We can offer God no greater evidence of our faithfulness than by frequently detaching and turning from all that is created to enjoy their creator for a single moment. In another letter, I'm not saying we must make our lives difficult while doing this. No, we serve God best in a sacred freedom. We work faithfully without hurry or worry, gently, calmly. We bring our minds back to God as many times as we find ourselves distracted. And then he says something that has meant a lot to me, because myself, I have learned that as much as my mind was buzzy and formerly depressed and had grave difficulties, that all of that was material for contemplation. All of that was raw fuel for contemplation when mixed with Lectio Divina, steeping in scripture. It wasn't something that was something I had to overcome. It was actually the way through. And he says, times of activity are no different from times of prayer. I possess God as calmly in the commotion of my kitchen, where sometimes several people are asking me for different things at the same time, as I do when on my knees before the Blessed Sacrament. My faith sometimes even becomes so bright, I am blinded by its dazzle and think I have lost it. And then he says, when that happens, it seems to me that the curtain of obscurity is drawn aside and the endless and cloudless day of the next life begins to dawn. Let us think of love constantly, he says. I have no doubt we will soon experience the benefits. And I have to tell you, I think Brother Lawrence had something similar to complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which makes him very beloved to me, as I have suffered with that. And for 10 years, he had a dark night of the soul from 26 to 36. What did he do? He kept praying. He kept turning to God. He kept washing dishes. He did not like kitchen work, but he was assigned to it. And later on, he would become the cobbler, of the sandals of the 100 brothers in the community. But at first, he had to do kitchen work for very many decades, and he was disabled. You think today they would have said, oh, we weren't going to put him in the kitchen. But, back then, they didn't think of it that way. And he had grave difficulties with it, but he prayed. He kept praying until he had, as Jim Finley says, you try to adopt the stance where you are able to more engage with contemplation and and he says, so that you don't break the thread as often, right? And then when you do break the thread, you just return, but you have fidelity to the rendezvous. And we are told by Joseph of Beaufort that Brother Lawrence eventually got to where he had pretty much unbroken peace, unbroken calm, because he was always praying. And that was something I was very taken with through a sermon as a child. A preacher said that we could learn to pray without ceasing, quoting one of Paul's verses on that. And I remember thinking, that's what I need, because my mind would never be still. And so I'm really grateful for this tradition. the Christian tradition of Brother Lawrence, and before him of the Cloud of Unknowing, because they take us through that with Dionysius, who had, really started it in the 5th century. And I can talk some about the use of pronoun, how I changed, because you'll hear in the Cloud of Unknowing, I use him for God, and both do use him, Anonymous and Brother Lawrence. But when I got to Brother Lawrence, I have so many students who identify as they, them, that those are their pronouns. And also Brother Lawrence is very Trinitarian. So is the Cloud of Unknowing. And Trinitarian is very, everybody is unique. We're all diverse. And God is in the middle of that, relating to, it's like God is also Trinity and unique and diverse. And just through all of that and thinking, what will my students think when they read this, if they ever were to read it? I was just thinking, can I maybe translate without any pronouns? And of course, I have a note about this at the beginning to explain it because, I like for people to know my thought process. But I just eventually told my editor, well, I'm just going to have to use him because I can't think of a way not to use him because, English has he, she, it, they, and how are we going to do this? And she goes, oh, well. And I said, I can't use God all the time and no pronouns. And then one morning I got up the next morning and all of a sudden I'm sitting at the computer during the pandemic and I thought, wait, they was just sitting there. I thought I could use they. And I'd already written it with him, but I thought, wow. And you can't just go back and do a global search and replace because pronouns are very intimate. And so I went back and used they for God, and it just fit. I'm not saying everybody should use that, but it just was something that the Spirit gave me. And I can't tell you how many people have said they love that aspect of it. So I'm happy to take some questions, or I know we want to leave time for questions. But I will just say one last thing. Joseph Beaufort says this about Brother Lawrence, and this is true of Brother Lawrence and of the Cloud. Another characteristic of Brother Lawrence was his extraordinary calm, which in another profession would have been called fearlessness. It revealed a wise soul raised above the fear and hope of all that is not God. He admired nothing, was surprised by nothing, and feared nothing. His stability of soul came from the same source as all his other spiritual strengths. And so I turn to these people and learn from their wisdom because they help me to develop and grow stability of soul and love. So happy to take questions. Let's see what it says, what y'all put in the
my goodness, just
chat.
I'm
so glad to be with y'all.
I just want to mention, I was just putting quotes from your work in the chat as you were as you were speaking, as I felt it pertained to what you were saying. And that last little image there, since God is within us, let's not look for them anywhere else. But I love that you're talking about that, because one of the real joys in reading your work is that it's so obvious that you have come into this beautiful relationship with these writers, and that you share that what you have found in that relationship with them. But then we get to look at the relationship of you with them through how you have brought their translations to us in this beautiful language. And so you're having that relationship, but we're getting to see the whole relationship. And just that is such a perfect example of it. I love this quote that I've just put in the chat there, because as a translator, I was such a grammar nerd that it was difficult for me to step away from structures and words that were not completely and totally correct. That took me a long time to get over, and to learn to build that relationship with the writer through that. So I deeply, deeply appreciated reading that and feeling that you were so much a part of those. You were a deep, deep part of the words that I was reading.
Mm,
Um, Translating is just a gift, really, really a gift. Thank you for sharing that with us.
thank you.
Um, Please, if anyone would like to share some thoughts or ask some
Questions?
questions, and again, we will edit out
I love questions.
anything personal.
Hi, could I just jump in here real quick,
Please
Hey
do.
there.
sister?
Good
Uh,
to see you,
you too.
Donna.
And I just wanted to remark, you were talking, sister, just now about how personable Sister Carmen makes the translation. And one thing that I wanted to point out is like, even before you get into it, the substance of it, the introduction alone in the description of the press that was there, the pages pressed, hung to dry, folded, cut, gathered, sewn, trimmed, backed, and covered. This book emerged quietly at the end of a century, deafened by disaster and death, which was very relatable at this time for all of us, I think, now. And then it talks, it was only published because, as often happens, a friend thought it ought to be. In its spirit drew people to it, and it has proven evergreen for its presence. And I totally butchered that,
No,
but
you didn't. That was
but
beautiful.
Carmen, the way you wrote it, it was like I was sitting there and we were reading it together and you were explaining it
And
to
let me
me.
show them that you're talking about Brother Lawrence, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that you picked that. I have to tell you because, and I appreciate that you read it and you read it beautifully because actually that is the core to me of Brother Lawrence. He
Mhm.
didn't publish anything when he was alive, and people were drawn to him like they were drawn to Benedict when he was in the cave. I mean, people don't talk about this much, but one of the reasons Benedict started monasteries was people were so visiting him at the cave when he was being a hermit that he had a place, needed a place to put people. So people were drawn to Brother Lawrence, and one of them was Joseph, who was younger, much younger than him. They struck up a friendship. And I mean, Brother Lawrence just wrote letters. He wrote the spiritual maxims, but he didn't ever say to himself, I'm going to write a book and, you know, sell it online and hope people will review it. No, people, once he died, were like, oh, do you have any more Joseph letters of Brother Lawrence? We miss him. And he went looking for him and he found the spiritual maxims. So I love that you brought that up. And yes, I do try to enter into the world. And yes, Brother Lawrence lived during an epidemic of the plague. He lived through the little ice age and floods and starvation times. It was a gruesome time. Yes. So thank you for bringing that up. I really, and friendship and community. Like I love the fact,
Mhm.
Margaret, that you brought up Dr. B at the beginning
Yeah.
because she was always bringing us back to community,
Yep.
Mhm.
like crisis contemplation. She was
Yeah.
always bringing us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the
And
one.
still does. And she still
Yeah,
does
Mhm.
as an
does.
ancestor.
She does. And Molly.
Yeah, Molly.
Thank you so much for this, Dr. Carmen. I am just really thrilled with all the insights that you've offered to us, and I'm going to be chewing on all of this for quite some time. So much appreciation to you. My question is about, another point of appreciation is that I love how you started with a song and talked about music and what it means to you. And I'm a musician and a music therapist, and we often talk about how in sessions with clients, we may not use music at all, but we're always thinking in musical language and like musical terms about the person's, like the rhythm
Right.
of their life or how they're speaking or maybe the melody of what's coming through from their expression. So I'm wondering about any connection between your love of music and the translation process itself, or what music you hear in the Cloud of Unknowing and the practice of the presence.
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question, Molly.
It is.
So what I love about that question is it also fits in with Donna, what you were just saying, read that part you just read, because what I started to say was I took that passage that you read out, that you picked to read from the introduction to the marsh. And I do this often with translation, but with the translations too, Molly, Donna. I will print it out. I'll set the printer, to the lightest tone possible, because I don't want to use up good, printer's ink. And I will take it to the marsh and walk, and I will try to get it more musical, like to feel. So Molly, when you say that, I have to say that I'm always thinking, because the people that I have translated write so beautifully, that you also want anyone who's reading the translation to have the same experience of that beauty, that inherent, because Alfred of Inisham is the same. He writes in poetic prose, and he's very famous in nerdy academic circles for writing in this poetic prose. And it's alliteration, it's Old English, but it's very Germanic, but it's before the French came, so it's totally Germanic. But he does it in a way, they're very keen to make sure that their words and the content and the rhythm and the sound are one. It's very much desert amas and abbas. The inside like the outside and the outside like the inside. So when you just described to me how you all, whether you're doing music literally at the time, you're thinking in musical terms, that is totally understandable to me. Yeah, it's all of a piece, in other words. So in other words, when you're having dialogue with someone, it's definitely a duet, right? Or yeah, I mean, it's harmony, it's symphony, it's multiple voices. And it's the way when you're doing music, you are listening to everyone and everything around you, right? Because I've sung in choirs before. And I mean, I remember how Barney Fife he was leading the choir on Andy Griffith. And he was like, y'all sound so great. And then he would join it and he'd be like, oh, y'all sound terrible, because he wasn't listening. And it was him, remember, who was doing it off key. And I think when you do music, you're really keen to listen to those playing the instruments, to those singing around you. And it's all about the everyone together. It's interconnected. It's Indra's net. It's this symphony of interconnectedness. It's like how I no longer call nature, so to speak. I call the earth, because Bayo Akomolafe has taught me that in the Oxford English Dictionary, the definition of nature is the earth and all the creatures that are not human. And it's everything to do with the earth as opposed to humans. I'm like, this is the kind of thinking that has gotten us, this binary type of thinking. So I never say, I'm not saying everyone needs to do this, but I say earth now. I love the earth. But yeah, I think I just think and the other thing, we could go back, since you said you do music therapy, go back to David playing for Saul, right? And think about, what does this beauty do for us? This sonic beauty. I have my friend who is a gardener, who's 81. She's like, we're just vibrations. I mean, we think vibrations don't have embodiment. We think when we say we're vibrations, but we're embodied vibrations. So yeah, I'll be thinking about that question for a long time. I don't even know that I've answered it. It's just a question I want to live out, like Rilke says.
To think about
Let's live the question, Molly. That's what we're going to do.
Well, We'll live it together. Thank you
We'll
so
live
much.
it together.
Yeah, and since you were mentioning my my nerdy tattoo of the scansion,
Yes.
and what I was teaching was the translation of epic poetry, and I wouldn't let a student ever start to translate something until they had the sound of the meter and they had
Yes.
the rhythm of the meter inside them, deeply inside them, and they had the sound of it without looking up any words, without
Yeah.
you know conjugating any verbs yet, but getting the rhythm of
Right.
the meter of the poetry inside them. And that's what's on my arm, is the
Yes.
scansion of the meter of the poetry. And just I feel it, that's so important. I love what Larry has put in the chat here, right? Being a translator is multidisciplined.
Yes.
Research historian, spiritual companion, puzzle solver. Yep, move out of the way.
Oh, I like that.
I
Spiritual
forgot. I
companion.
should have added musician in there
And
too.
musician.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I like that. I really, and I will say this on to what Larry has said and Molly and everyone, that the Cloud of Unknowing in the original, you cannot read. He says, he warns at the beginning, I don't want anybody to read this who doesn't really care about this. And then he says, and I want you to read it from beginning to end. Like, I want you to read all of it. Like, don't just pick and like read all. And the reason he says that is because if you read the Cloud, I mean, you can still, we can jump about, okay? But what he's trying to say is don't treat it flippantly, really. And if you read the Cloud of Unknowing and really engage in contemplative reading of it, it is meditative, the way it sounds and what it says. You cannot help but meditate. It is mimetic. So it is music. And Jim Finley talks about this too. He says, you try to write in such a way, because what he does in the Cloud of Unknowing is he makes language and he unmakes it. So there's this use of negation. There's a cloud of unknowing. He makes language and he unmakes it. He takes us to these contemplative ways of experiencing. Yeah, I just love it.
Yeah, and everyone, it's the translator's notes, and I remember a part of your notes are that about the spiritual practice of translation, but the actual reading of it is a contemplative practice.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that part.
He wrote it that way.
Yeah,
I
really.
love that, Larry. I'm going to hold on to that, multidisciplined. That's good.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
And a labor of love, no doubt.
Yeah, it is definitely a labor. It really is. And I remember Mirabai Star one time. She and Andrew Harvey were really kind to invite me to come teach for one of their courses, and she was like, "It's really communing, and it really does feel like you're communing with these people who are dead, but their bodies are not here, but they're definitely alive. Definitely."
And thank you, Sarah Lee, for saying I'm going to dwell on the nature and earth concepts, since we humans allegedly come from the earth in origin. Makes great sense, and dwell
Love that.
gratefully. Yeah. Well, you have, as Molly says, given us so much to sit with and chew on and be with. And we are so grateful.
Thank y'all.
Very,
Y'all
very
are such a wonderful community. Thank you, Margaret, for your invitation. And thank you all for being here. I have enjoyed being with you more than I can say. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. And to all of you.
Thanks for being here, Carmen.
Forward.
Thank
you.
Everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Okay.